everybody. Welcome back to the Guatemala Life and Culture Podcast. It is episode 6. We're going to talk about health and religion. John?
Hi, I'm Dawn.
Hi,
Thanks,
Dawn.
Jeff.
I'm Jeff. So hopefully you know who we are by this point. Yes. It means you've been listening or watching our previous episodes. If you haven't, we encourage you to do so. In this episode, we're going to, it's not going to be super in-depth. It's just going to, I guess, kind of like most of our episodes, be a cliff notes of what we could talk about. Sure. But we'll start off with just kind of physical and mental health. So with our Guatemalan community, we have, according to, and this stat's a little old, in 2006, 1 of every 2 children in Guatemala were malnourished. That's the worst malnutrition problem in Latin America. And it's not necessarily that they're not getting enough food. It's the type of food that they're consuming. Yeah. We talked about the tortillas in a previous episode of those aren't the healthiest thing to eat. So yeah, malnourishment is certainly an issue. And just because of the war, because of everything that they went through, the basic concepts of what is healthy, what is unhealthy to eat isn't necessarily known.
Right.
And you typically do what you were modeled when you were younger. And let's face it, if you were growing up in a war-torn country trying to survive day to day, there's certain things that you're going to lean on that you leaned on during your survival time that as we look at it in our comfy, potentially middle-class America is common sense. But as we all know, common sense is only common to a point.
That's true. Yeah.
Common sense is different for every culture, or else we wouldn't have cultural issues. Yeah. Right.
So would you say the malnourishment could be just stemming from not the most well-balanced diet of like probably not as many vegetables as like, let's face it, that none of us eat or enjoy eating.
I don't
all.
eat.
Some of us,
yeah.
But like you said, those big food items that I feel are sustainable, like tortillas, rice, potatoes, those types of foods,
hearty foods,
aren't bad in themselves. But if that's all you're eating day to day and you're not incorporating other nutrients, yes, that it wouldn't be the best.
Yeah, sugars, right? You know, there's a lot of sugar in tortillas, which people don't realize. I mean, they don't taste sweet, but. And let's just put a disclaimer out there right now. I don't know really anything about the medical profession, nor have ever worked in any way. We are not medical professionals. So we do encourage you. We do have some medical contacts that we work with very closely, are friends of ours that work with the Guatemalan population in that field. So if you are listening to this and you think of something and you have a specific question, we can absolutely put you into contact with them. So to continue this episode, so yeah, there was a malnourishment issue. There's the nutrition issue, mental health. So mental health culturally is something that isn't really focused on for the Guatemalan population. And we're also going to be talking about religion in this episode. So mental health and religion kind of go hand in hand in a lot of ways. So depression or anxiety might be looked at as something that is physically wrong with them because of those symptoms of it. But they might not understand the origin or what that is. Does that make sense?
I was going to say, in my medical interpreting experience, and when you go to a Springvale clinic, for one, somewhere where you fill out a lot of information about your medical background, mental health is a huge part of that, survey or questions that you're asked as establishing care. So that is just defining what is depression is something that is pretty common, because you have the scaled questions of, on a weekly basis, how often do you feel depressed or stressed or anxious, and explaining, not assuming people don't understand what that means, but if someone doesn't, they'll ask me, what do you mean by anxious, or what do you mean by depressed? And you'll, back to the language and culture, explain, severe feelings or elongated feelings of sadness where you can't function as you normally would,
beyond the norm, right?
Right. So you do have to define what those mental health issues mean first.
And that can be very complicated, mental. And that's why I did well in college, because there was no black and white issues. I went, for psychology, criminology. So if I had to go for math or anything that was a black and white answer, I probably would not have done very well. But say all that to say, for mental health, it is very case by case basis. Obviously, every person's story and symptoms can be unique. There's some common threads through that, but you can't just take your experience all the time and say, oh, this is what is wrong with them, or this is what's wrong with me. Like,
absolutely.
It can be challenging that way. So mental health, because of all that, what is it? What does it mean? That's one aspect. And then the second aspect of it is, how do you deal with it? And there are a handful of our Guatemalan population that wouldn't take medicine for that, or any sort of counseling or treatment, because the church will deal with it.
Yeah.
That may or may not work. Or it's not identified as that problem. Like, they might not be, they're not depressed. They need more prayer in their life.
Yeah.
It's all these things are caused by a spiritual issue more than a chemical issue or a social emotional issue. Right. So again, we could get in the weeds on that, but bottom line is, realize that it's more of a cultural taboo still. It's a cultural taboo in our society.
Yes.
Becoming much more, much better, but it's still even more so a cultural taboo for our Guatemalan population. Yeah. Because A, not sure what it is, or B, it's just not talked about. So that leads to alcoholism. I think if you were to talk to our local law enforcement or our paramedics, or any of the families, the number one issue would be alcoholism. The drug epidemic, the opioid epidemic really hasn't hit the Guatemalan population quite like it has the rest of the population yet. But alcoholism, whether you're in Guatemala, in the Aldea, or you're here, that is probably the number one issue, mainly with the men. And I think, I couldn't tell you the percentage of the calls, but again, going back to law enforcement, that would be mainly their issue when they're called out to something or interacting in a negative way. It would be because someone is under the influence of alcohol.
That would be the root of the issue.
Yeah, and working in the, previously, in some child abuse situations, like, alcohol was usually a common thread with that within the Guatemalan population whenever that was a problem. Right. So you have a visual up here. Again, if you are listening to this, we'll have a link to the visuals at the bottom in this episode. So this is a map of Guatemala. It's a graph. It's from Prensa Libre, which is the national newspaper of Guatemala. And in red, this is it is in Spanish, so I guess I should do my best to
look at that.
Actually explain what it's saying here, right? So this is malnutrition, chronic malnutrition from in 2014 and 15. So again, it is about 10 years old, but at the time of this, around 69% of children were chronically malnourished. In Huehuetenango and Quiché provinces. So again, the area where our families are coming from, where the war hit the most, is where the chronic malnutrition is the worst. So you're seeing, again, this thread. Everything's being connected, right? Everything's kind of coming from this war, and it's trickling down through today. So physical, mental health. Don, in a previous episode, you talked about health class. You talked about, they do sexual education in these health classes. In Guatemala, it's not so much required or talked about. Mm-hmm. And, we mentioned alcoholism. Younger females becoming pregnant is unfortunately a big issue here as well. And a lot of people might ask why. Like, what is the reason for that? Yeah. And a common answer that's given is, well, it's cultural. Mm-hmm. But I'll tell you that they're still not okay with it in the culture. I think when people say that, it's like, oh, they're fine with it.
That is what it is understood as. Yeah.
Yes, but that's not the case. Mm-hmm. Like, these parents don't want their daughters to become pregnant as a young teenager.
Right. Yeah.
That's not what they desire. Mm-hmm. That's not what they want. Unfortunately, it happens because of the way that the culture is, in a sense that kids can't go to school as long as, let me rephrase that. Mm-hmm. They could go to school longer, but because the family is in need of money, they might have to drop out of school earlier, because we talked about schools are there, but they might not be able to attend because they have to help the mom with the younger siblings in the home, and the boys maybe going off to work. Mm-hmm. So you're becoming an adult at a much younger age.
Yes.
Because of necessity from your culture.
Right.
If they could all have it the way that we have it in middle class America, I'm sure that they would take that to where they don't have to have their kid drop out of school, where they don't have to send their son away to go work. Like, but
of course,
the reality is they can't do that. So because of dropping out, because of staying home, you become an adult at a much younger age. You're looked at as an adult at a younger age. And if the rest of your life as a young girl is basically looking after kids and helping in the home, what's the reason you wouldn't get married or together with someone? Because that's what your life is going to be. And if you look at all of world history, the age at which that happened was younger, because that's kind of the way life was.
Right.
Now, translate that to here, the States, and you have that mindset, that culture, and unfortunately that leads to some early teen pregnancies. And unfortunately it's mainly to older men, which is, obviously not okay. And I don't know, we've both worked with families that have been in that situation. And it's, again, I just want to reiterate, it's not something that they want. It's not something that they're okay with, but it's something that they didn't know they had any control over. And in the end, as a parent, you can only control so much.
Right. Yeah.
But it comes down to circling back in a long-winded way to sexual education, which is in Guatemala, it doesn't really exist.
Right.
And so there was a study done. This is from Reuters, and an article. And then we also did, on a previous trip, a couple interviews ourselves with some of the school and young ladies. And so from this Reuters article, a fourth of the children in Guatemala were born to adolescent mothers in the last 5 years. So in 2015, again, little dated, the minimum age of marriage was raised from 14 to 18 years. So within the last 10 years, the legal age of marriage was 14 because that's the age that they would drop out.
Yeah.
And we would look at that and be like, no.
Right.
But as the war has ended, as society is able to progress, as opportunities are able to arise, they're like, no, that doesn't need to happen.
Exactly.
That 18, right? Which is what we have in here in the States.
Right. Yeah.
And so one of the quotes that they had from this article is talking about sexual education. Angela, a 14-year-old, said, she said, I know they would come from your belly, but I didn't know how you would make them. And then they go on to kind of talk about the ignorance of reproduction is rooted in traditional culture and teachings from the Catholic Church and evangelical churches. Basically, where talk of sex is shameful and forbidden. Yeah. So they just don't talk about it. And going on to the interview that we had, when asking about what is talked about sexual education wise, she was, they haven't really told us anything. They don't give talks like that. But in Bible class, it says to avoid strange women. Like, what does that mean? Yeah. Right? Strange women.
That is a great question.
Yeah. She went on to say, men are 80% sex, women are 80% love. Then going to psychology, she goes, in psychology, I learned that girls are afraid that their boyfriend will leave her if she says no. So yeah, the guy convinces her. So yeah, it's complicated. It's something that is, I think as a community, everyone is working towards improvement in that area. And I think that, again, the cultural understanding helps provide a little glimpse into that as to the reason behind it all. But I would just encourage people to not look down on the parents. Right. It's not that they're approving of this. And education, sexual education not only has to happen with the young ladies, but with the men as well, as well as a legal education.
Right.
That is not okay.
Right.
And that there are laws and that you cannot and should not take advantage in any way of that sort. So that's a community effort. That's something that you can't just focus on the young ladies and say, don't do this. You also have to focus on, the men and say, you can't do that too, in a way. So yeah,
and that it's comes out there from healthcare providers, from teachers, law enforcement, teachers, like you said, community effort. And I see those things. I can attest to seeing those things in my line of work at the school as well as in healthcare. That there are those agencies and people in place who are educating, who are informing, that there are other options, and and that's not just. I mean, you could take that and say, birth control. There's plethora of options in this day and age, and as far as that education goes,
and culturally too, that could be an issue taboo. With birth control. Taboo,
right? Yes. So yeah, you're right. It is definitely a team effort as far as working together to inform, to educate, and learn together. Yeah.
So you have, the alcoholism, you have the teen pregnancy. Those are probably the two most common things that you see. Malnutrition. Yeah. So kind of transitioning from that to religion. And so religion, again, intertwined into all of this. But this is from the Hatchet Book Group, and essentially they say religion in Guatemala is fairly complex, with traditional Mayan spirituality still very much a presence, particularly in the highlands, which is where our families are from, along with Catholicism and the more recent incursions of evangelical Christianity. So a third of Guatemala now claims adherence to Protestant or evangelical Christianity. And in our population here, I think people would be surprised to find out that the majority is of an evangelical or Protestant group. We have, oh my goodness,
church-wise.
Yeah, church-wise. I'm trying to think at least 8. We have a directory.
Yeah, I remember a gentleman who's a former missionary pastor, even maybe in our community, who in our kind of focus group, who is aware and has a big connection. I thought I'd heard 12. Maybe those were the tiendas, though. It could have been one or the other. Yes.
Yeah, we're talking about all versions of Protestant denominations. You have your more charismatic, your more traditional, and then you have your Catholic St. Joe's or San Jose. They have their Catholic Spanish masses. So there's still a large population with that, but the majority is actually evangelical. And
that's, sorry to interrupt, but if I'm asked by students at school, if they ask me, what church do you go to, or what religion are you? Because they'll flat out ask. And so the definition of like Christian is more specific. I guess if I were to say, you know, as I do say, yeah, I'm a Christian, they would say, oh, like what kind? Yes. Evangelical, Baptist.
Which I think would be good for everyone in our culture to ask as well, because that is such a broad definition.
Right.
Compared to what it used to be.
Yeah, you're right. It is true. Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the words that they'll refer to, and this kind of confused me at first, when they're talking about going to church, they'll say culto.
Yeah, culto.
culto. So culto, when I hear that word or I see that word, I'm like, oh my God, they're going to a cult.
Right. Yeah.
Like, oh, thanks for letting me know. But that's not what it means. No. It's just basically a service.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that is something that might help you avoid some misunderstandings, is understanding that.
Yeah.
But as you know, we had an episode on Guatemala history. We talked about, you know, all of that, but going back even further, obviously Guatemala was Mayan indigenous Indians. That was Guatemala. Now, then you had the Spanish conquest, the conquistadors. That's how we get the Spanish language mixed in. And then that's how we get a kind of a complex Guatemala that eventually led to a civil war of the kind of more European Guatemalans and the indigenous Guatemalans.
Right.
So fast forward even more, through all those years, you had the Mayan spiritual beliefs that kind of stayed there, but then the Spanish conquistadors brought Catholicism. But then in 1975, there was a huge earthquake, and Guatemala caused a lot of devastation in the midst of the Civil War. I mean, imagine that. Yeah. So during that time, a lot of evangelical missionaries went to Guatemala to help out, and that brought that Protestant evangelicalism. So
makes sense.
Yeah. So now you have, you know, 50-ish years of evangelicalism on top of Catholicism and the spiritual Mayan beliefs. And you do kind of have a mix, you know, again, going back to the diversity comments that we talked about, it's just as diverse religiously as we have in our community. But it's funny, you still see the Mayan beliefs come out. So maybe, okay. Example. I have two quick examples, and then you can go with yours. Yeah. So first example is we were in Guatemala, and we were there with some kids. They were visiting their grandparents and their family. And as we were getting ready to return to the States, the aunt and the grandma went off with the kid, and then, you know, they went into a room and they had like these branches and weird things. And I was like, that's interesting.
That they were maybe applying on.
Well, I didn't know. I'm just like, maybe they're just carrying it with them when they're heading back to
know what they were for.
Their place afterwards. I don't know.
Yeah.
So anyway, long story short, it ended up being they were giving like a traditional Mayan blessing for the trip home. And I'm like, oh, okay. Cool.
Well, what does that mean?
Know, I didn't get to see the ceremony, or not really ceremony, but whatever they did. But then the second one is I had COVID back in 2020.
Yeah.
And Guatemalan family that I'm close with, they knew that, and they said, we have something that'll help. I'm like, all right, at this point I'll kind of take anything.
Yeah.
So sure enough, they came over, they dropped a bag of things off on my porch, and, I went out and got it and opened it, and it was a thermos of some liquid. And I asked them, I texted, I said like, hey, what is this?
Yeah.
They're
what
like, oh, it's a suero.
Yes.
It's just like a...
Suero is like a Pedialyte or a just like fluid.
Basically a fluid, because it doesn't have to be Pedialyte.
No,
because it was not.
No.
Any sort of thing like that. But anyway, I was like, you know what the heck? I'm just going to drink it. And it was okay. I have no idea what I drank to this day.
Still don't know what it was.
But in their mind, that's what they drink when they're not feeling well.
Yeah.
And that was a Mayan thing that was passed down from their parents, that they drink a concoction that they put together. And so
it might be like a chicken broth, like, when you're not feeling well, like it doesn't magically make it go away, but that's a culturally, like, when you're sick, this is what you eat. This is what you drink.
Yeah. So that's still out there. And I'm trying to think of a few other common ones that we see out there.
So the one that I think of, it is not specifically for Guatemalan culture. I know this is rooted in, Mexican culture as well, parts of South America, when when a baby is born, in some Latino cultures or countries, it's very spiritual. It stems from a spirituality of like keeping the spirits away, quote unquote. The little bracelet or necklace that the baby wears. The purpose of it is to keep them safe and protected, but that is, a spiritual, you could say, so the ancestors protect them, so the spirits protect them, whatever. It could be, this very complex, or just a custom that they're used to. That's what you put on a baby's wrist, is this little, very pretty, intricate bracelet, and that's the purpose of it.
It's a great one.
Yeah, that's just one example that I thought of. Yeah,
and so you're kind of seeing how this is kind of combining health and religion, right?
Yes,
how it
exactly.
kind of goes together. And so with that, let's take that. They might identify as a evangelical Protestant Christian and fully believe everything that group does, but they'll still
have the custom,
that custom that they adhere to.
Yes.
Whether it's just, what's the word I'm looking for? Superstition.
Exactly.
It's like, again, as a sports fan, superstition, there's certain things I'll do. Do I really think it's going to make a difference to the game of something that I'm watching on my TV in my living room?
Yeah.
No, I don't. Do I still do it? Yes.
Sure.
Would I still be mad if if they lost because I didn't do it? Yes. But do I really know that? No.
Deep down.
So
no. Yeah.
it's a similar kind of mindset with
sure.
some of that stuff.
Yes.
Yeah. There was another one I heard the other day, and I kind of gave a weird look because it kind of threw me off. So apparently if you you can't walk over someone's legs. Like if they're sitting on the ground, like maybe up against a couch or chair, and someone walks over the legs, that's like a horrible thing to do.
That's like a superstition.
Yeah.
So this is in Guatemalan culture, you're saying?
I don't know if I'm going to say it's all of Guatemalan culture, but it was a Guatemalan family.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It was just in that instance. I'm like, oh my gosh.
Interesting. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, and then when I was in Asia, if you were to pat in the Buddhist culture, if you were to pat a kid on the head, that supposedly takes years off their life, at least at the time that I was there.
Gotcha.
So that was really hard. You're like, hey, not going to do that.
Yeah, that would be a bad one.
But yeah, so that leads me to kind of one of the final points here is some people ask, is there anything, because you hear about things like that from people who travel. It's like, oh, if you give the okay sign in this country, it's the same as flipping the bird, or don't show the bottom of your foot. So is there anything like that in Guatemalan culture that people should be aware of? And honestly, I don't think that there is.
No. Not that I'm
except
aware
for
of.
Potentially walking over someone's legs.
Maybe.
Which if you don't know the person, don't do that anyway.
Sure.
That's just weird.
Yes. No, there's nothing that I have come across that is that this is helpful to know, to not offend someone.
Yeah. And so I guess we'll end with this. I know I just said that, but I've heard people say that Guatemalans are like behind closed doors, like their houses, they have, the blankets or the towels over the windows, the churches, like we can't see what's going on in there. And to which point I'd be like, do you really want people to see into your house and what you're doing? Do you can you know what's going on in a church when you drive by it, whether it's Hispanic or not? Right. No,
you can't.
But to pull that curtain back on the churches right now. So I think St. Joe's, it's pretty open. I
Yes.
think it's known
Very
what
much
what
so.
is what their services are very similar. But as far as these other Latino churches, you might hear the super loud music, and I will say, music is extremely loud.
It is.
Extremely loud.
It is
that is one of
Yeah.
the things, that is a cultural thing. Guatemala here, the music is deafening.
The speakers are turned all the way up.
Yes.
Yeah.
And whether you are what we would say charismatic, but that typically have the longer church services, that's every church service, no matter what denomination you are.
It is pretty.
They're
It is
very
pretty
long.
lengthy. Yeah. Yeah.
They do have music. The music is more of a marimba.
Marimba would be like I think the
I'm not great
music
at-
of Guatemala. Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds similar.
From a
It's-
musician standpoint, yes, which I wouldn't say I am. I do play guitar, but
guitar.
I do, yeah.
Same.
Thank you, yeah. But yes, if you are in a service and sing multiple songs, you easily, quickly recognize like these all kind of have the same rhythm. They do
Yes.
have a very similar rhythmic undertone, and even the cadence of the song, you're like, okay, no, these are different words, but it kind of all starts to sound similar. And in services in Guatemala, now I haven't attended a few, maybe one or two services here in the community at a church, but services that I've attended in Guatemala have been more special because we were visitors. So yeah, when they told me it was a 5-hour service, they were not kidding.
Yeah.
And then it's like song after song, and it's very formal. Each song is led by a different woman. They come up and kind of share a word or a prayer, and then the song.
Or man.
Or a man. I mean, yeah.
Just depends.
There's the preacher is, or, pastor preacher is most definitely a man. And kind of the overall, MC of the event is typically male, and females might come up and do like a prayer spot or songs.
So there's multiple players is
yes.
basically what we're saying is
Yeah.
when you go to a Latino or Guatemalan church service,
Correct. Yes.
there are multiple players at hand. And I will say too, if you're more than welcome
Absolutely.
to go to any, they're not going to turn you away. They would be perfectly fine with you being there. And more than likely, they will introduce you or welcome you in front of everybody.
Yes.
They might not know your name,
Right.
but they'll be like, our American friend in the back, welcome.
Yes.
The other thing to know is typically for most of the churches, there aren't any like Sunday school situations for the children. Everybody is in the main
together.
service together.
Yes.
So babies, little kid all the way up to adult, they're all in there together. The service is a family affair. So, I guess the more that I talk about this, the more conversations and comments I'm thinking of from the
Absolutely.
community that would be good to chat about real quick. And
Yeah.
that is, these churches these Guatemalans, for the most part, are believers in Jesus Christ.
Right.
I presented at numerous church groups, and one of the questions I get is like, do we give them Bible tracts in Spanish? Do we do this?
Right.
And no.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
All just relationships.
Absolutely.
Right? Relationships is what is important. But yeah, it's a good experience. It's different, but it's all for the same purpose. The churches are where you do feel like you're in Guatemala, which is why they typically have church sometimes 3-4 times a week, because it's a place where they can go and feel like they're at home. They feel like they're safe. And when you're there, you do feel like you're there. And so that's why a lot of times they're at church quite often. For that. And that's typically when I think our community would see them out walking around in the traditional garb, or all fancied up.
It is a fancy event. Yeah, you dress up for church. Yes.
Yeah, it's kind of old school today. Like you don't see that as much with us in the States anymore. But for them, you still dress up.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Cool. All right, Donnie, anything else on health? Or I know health we barely covered, but again, that's something that we can hook you up if you want to know more about that. Absolutely. But we just wanted to kind of cliff notes of that. But anything else on health or religion?
That's what I can think of, Jeff. Yeah.
All right. Well, awesome. So that wraps up another episode here, and we will be going into immigration. So that is a hot topic. Again, if you would like to see the visuals of today's episode, please see the link associated with the episode. And also, please check out any of our previous episodes if you haven't already. And if you have any questions, our contact information is linked. And please reach out. We'd be happy to have a conversation. Yeah.